Good morning, students. Welcome to today's class on the exchange of gases at respiratory surface. As our semester 5 is related with physiology, animal physiology, but the topic of respiration is regarding to the human physiology. So here we are going to study the exchange of respiratory gases at the respiratory surfaces in human beings. So, let us have a look on the topic. So exchange of gas generally takes place at a respiratory surface because the surface, whether it may be alveolar surface or whether it may be the tissue surface, both the surfaces are richly supplied with blood capillaries. That means the surfaces are highly vascularized. As soon as the source of oxygen, as soon as the source of oxygen, that means whether it may be a atmospheric oxygen for the terrestrial animal or whether it may be the dissolved oxygen for the aquatic animal. So as soon as the source of oxygen comes in contact with respiratory surface, just like the alveoli in case of human beings or terrestrial animals, and the gill lamellae in case of the aquatic animal. So as soon as the source of oxygen come in contact with such respiratory surfaces by any sort of ventilation mechanism, then the gaseous exchange at that level takes place. It is believed that the gases exchange by simple diffusion. That means the exchange of gases takes place by simple diffusion, which is caused due to difference in partial pressure of respiratory gases in the medium. So, if there is a there is difference in partial pressure of respiratory gases, for example, oxygen and CO2, then always the gas move from their high partial pressure to the low partial pressure. That means at the region from the region of high partial pressure to the region of low partial pressure. In the environment, the partial pressure of oxygen is comparatively higher than in the body. Naturally, we know that the partial pressure of oxygen in the surrounding medium is always high as compared to the body. Therefore, oxygen diffuses from the environment into the body through these respiratory surfaces. Similarly, in the case of a body, the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, as there is respiration, as the metabolic activities occur in the body, the CO2 as a result of metabolism is produced, and as the CO2 is produced, the concentration, or you can say partial pressure of CO2 in the body is always higher than the immediate environment. Hence, the CO2 is diffused outside the body through these respiratory surfaces. So due to the difference in partial pressure, oxygen diffuses inside the body and CO2 diffuses outside the body. Now let us have a look on the sites of gases exchange inside the human body. So sites of gases exchange, in general, human bodies, the exchange of gas takes place at two sites. First site at lungs level, that means at the alveolar level. So this one in the diagram, this upper side, this is the site of exchange of gas at alveolar level. So here you can see in the diagram the exchange is shown. Oxygen from environment is taken into the lungs through inspired air, and from the lungs the exchange of gas takes place between blood and alveoli here. So this is the first exchange of gas which occurs at lungs level between blood and air. The second site of exchange of gas is here, this one, at the lower side. This is at the tissue level. So at the tissue level, the exchange of gas takes place between blood and tissue. So these are the two important sites of exchange of gases. Now let us see one by one both the sites. how the exchange of gas takes place. So firstly, we will see the exchange of gas at lungs level. So generally, the pulmonary artery to the lungs, whenever the blood comes to the lungs, it is pumped by right ventricle up to the lungs, and the vessel which carry blood from right ventricle to the lungs, that is pulmonary artery. So pulmonary artery from the right ventricle of the lungs, it carry deoxygenated blood, that means CO2 containing blood up to the lungs. So pulmonary artery brings deoxygenated blood to the lungs. When the pulmonary artery enters into the lung, immediately it divides into capillaries, and these capillaries, they then surround the alveoli. That means the alveoli are in very close or immediate contact with the capillary surface. So you can say lungs or the alveoli, air sacs, they are richly supplied with blood capillaries. So this pulmonary artery, after entering into the lungs, it then divides into capillary network, which completely surround the air sacs or alveoli. The thin and moist walls of both alveoli and capillary allow the rapid exchange of respiratory gases. For example, oxygen passes from air into the blood, while the CO2 from the blood is diffused into the air. So that type of exchange between the blood and air takes place at this alveolar level. So oxygen passes from air into the blood, and CO2 from blood passes into the air. In this diagram, it is shown here by two different colors. Oxygen coming from outer environment into the alveoli, which is shown in red color. This oxygen diffuses from alveoli into the blood, and CO2 from blood diffuse into the alveoli, which is carried out or which is then exhaled out. So the pulmonary vein, the blood after oxygenation, this blood after oxygenation, it is collected by pulmonary vein. So pulmonary vein collect this oxygenated blood and carry to the heart, from where it is pumped to various tissues for respiration, for the respiratory activities. The gaseous exchange in the lungs uh, depends upon the difference between partial pressure of oxygen and CO2 in the pulmonary in the uh, alveoli and venous blood. That means the blood which is flowing to the lungs. The pressure of oxygen in the air sacs, is higher than in the capillaries, while the pressure of CO2 in the capillaries is higher than in the air sacs. So naturally there is diffusion. Hence O2 is passed from air sacs into the blood, and CO2 from blood, it is diffused into the air sac, which is later exhaled. So this is all about the exchange of gas at alveolar level. So alveolar gases exchange. Now let us see exchange of gases at tissue level. So what happens at tissue level? When the blood from pulmonary vein, that means the oxygenated blood from pulmonary vein, it goes to left auricle. From left auricle, it is pumped into left ventricle. From left ventricle, it is pumped into systemic aorta, and from systemic aorta, various branches carry this oxygenated blood to various parts of the tissue. This is how the circulation takes place. That we have, or that you know how the circulation takes place. So when such oxygenated blood is uh, carried to the tissue, the gaseous exchange in the tissue, it is also governed in the same pattern or in the same principle as in the lungs. Oxygen passes from the region of high partial pressure to the region of low partial pressure. As the oxygen leaves, or you can say as the oxygen comes out from the plasma, the oxyhemoglobin again converts back to hemoglobin, thereby ensuring the adequate concentration of oxygen in the plasma. As the plasma oxygen concentration, or you can say as in the plasma, the partial pressure of oxygen increases. So naturally, this will create a difference in concentration gradient between the level of oxygen in plasma and in the tissues. So the CO2 which is produced during oxidative process of cellular respiration, it passes into the tissue fluid and it establishes a high partial pressure in the tissue. As the oxygen established a high partial pressure in the plasma, the CO2 established a high partial pressure of CO2 in the tissue. So here's the difference in concentration gradients. It is then developed. So partial pressure of CO2 is much lower in blood flowing through the blood capillaries of the organ, and so the CO2 from the tissue is diffused into the tissue fluid and then into the blood. Blood has released oxygen and is saturated with CO2. Such CO2 saturated blood is called venous blood, and venous blood flows to the lungs where CO2 is expelled out uh, through the expired air. So this is how exchange of gases takes place at tissue level. Here are some additional points to remember. What is the total partial pressure of the dry air which we uh, breathe? So total partial pressure of dry air, it is approximately it is about 713 mm of Hg. Then partial pressure of oxygen, which can be represented by PO2 in the alveoli, it is approximately 100 mm Hg. Then partial pressure of CO2, which can be represented by PCO2 in alveoli, it is approximately 36 mm of Hg. Similarly, the partial pressure of venous blood of oxygen is 40 mm of Hg, and partial pressure of CO2 in the venous blood is 46 mm of Hg. So there is a difference between partial pressure of oxygen in alveoli and partial pressure of oxygen in venous blood. So difference of this partial pressure of oxygen in alveoli and venous blood, it is approximately of 60 mm Hg, and partial difference of partial pressure of CO2 in alveoli and in venous blood, it is approximately of 10 mm Hg. So these are some points which you have to remember. So this is all about the exchange of gases at the respiratory surfaces. So here we are going to stop this topic. Then we'll continue with next topic tomorrow. Thank you.